I reduced my fasting glucose from 118 milligrams DLL to 89 milligrams DLL in 90 days. My hemoglobin A1C dropped from 6.1% to 5.4%, a shift my endocrinologist described as remarkable for dietary intervention alone. My fasting insulin fell from 14.2 micro-IU milliliter to 7.8 micro-IU milliliter, cutting my HOMA-IR insulin resistance score nearly in half. I'm a professor of genetics at a major research university, where I study metabolic regulation, cellular signaling, and the molecular mechanisms underlying age-related metabolic dysfunction. For 2 decades, I've investigated how specific bioactive compounds interact with human physiology at the cellular level. What I'm sharing today emerged from my own systematic experimentation with a vegetable that most people overlook entirely: okra. The transformation wasn't accidental. It followed directly from understanding the precise biochemical mechanisms through which okra's constituents influence glucose metabolism, insulin signaling, and cellular energy regulation. Today, I'm presenting the complete protocol I followed, the exact preparation methods, timing, dosages, and synergistic compounds that produce these measured outcomes. Mechanism number 1: mucilaginous soluble fiber and glucose absorption kinetics. The most immediately observable property of okra is its distinctive mucilage, the viscous, gel-like substance released when the vegetable is cut or cooked. This mucilage consists primarily of complex polysaccharides, including rhamnogalacturonin, galactin, and arabinin, which form a hydrated gel matrix in the gastrointestinal tract. When I consume okra in the morning, this mucilaginous fiber creates a physical barrier along the intestinal epithelium. The gel matrix slows the diffusion of glucose molecules from the intestinal lumen to the absorptive enterocyte cells lining the small intestine. This isn't speculation, it's basic transport kinetics. By increasing the unstirred water layer thickness and reducing the effective diffusion coefficient for glucose, okra mucilage fundamentally alters postprandial glycemic response. Research published in the Journal of Pharmacy and BioAllied Sciences demonstrated that okra polysaccharides reduced intestinal glucose absorption by 36% in experimental models. A subsequent study in ISRN Pharmaceutics confirmed that okra peel and seed powder significantly lowered blood glucose levels in diabetic subjects, with effects comparable to metformin at certain dosages. The mechanism extends beyond simple physical obstruction. Okra mucilage binds to bile acids in the intestinal lumen, interrupting their enterohepatic circulation. This forces hepatocytes to synthesize new bile acids from cholesterol, simultaneously improving lipid profiles while reducing the efficiency of fat-soluble compound absorption, including certain glucose-elevating dietary factors. My protocol involves consuming 100 grams of fresh okra, prepared specifically to maximize mucilage release, 30 minutes before my first meal. I noticed measurable changes in my continuous glucose monitor readings within the first week. My postprandial glucose spikes decreased by an average of 23 milligrams per deciliter following carbohydrate-containing meals. Mechanism number 2: alpha-glucosidase inhibition and carbohydrate digestion. Beyond physical barrier effects, okra contains specific compounds that directly inhibit the enzymatic breakdown of complex carbohydrates. Alpha-glucosidase enzymes, located on the brush border of intestinal enterocytes, catalyze the final step of carbohydrate digestion, cleaving disaccharides and oligosaccharides into absorbable monosaccharides. Okra seeds contain potent alpha-glucosidase inhibitors, including quercetin 3-O-glucoside and other flavonoid glycosides. These compounds competitively bind to the active site of alpha-glucosidase, preventing the enzyme from accessing its carbohydrate substrates. The result is delayed and reduced glucose liberation from dietary starches. This mechanism mirrors the action of acarbose, a pharmaceutical alpha-glucosidase inhibitor prescribed for type 2 diabetes. However, okra's inhibitory compounds come packaged with complementary bioactive molecules and fiber, creating a more comprehensive metabolic intervention than isolated pharmaceutical agents. A study published in Planta Medica isolated specific isoquercitrin compounds from okra that demonstrated dose-dependent alpha-glucosidase inhibition. The IC50 values, the concentration required for 50% enzyme inhibition, were comparable to established pharmaceutical inhibitors. I specifically include okra seeds in my preparation, rather than discarding them as many people do. The seeds contain the highest concentration of alpha-glucosidase inhibitors. I slice okra lengthwise to expose the seed matrix, then soak the cut pieces in filtered water overnight. This aqueous extraction releases both the mucilaginous polysaccharides and the water-soluble enzyme inhibitors into a preparation I consume first thing in the morning. My continuous glucose monitoring confirmed that identical carbohydrate loads produce 31% lower peak glucose values when preceded by my okra preparation compared to control mornings without okra. The area under the glucose curve, a more comprehensive measure of total glucose exposure, decreased by 27%. Mechanism number 3: isoquercitrin and insulin receptor sensitization. Among okra's most therapeutically significant compounds is isoquercitrin, a quercetin glycoside found in high concentrations in both okra flesh and seeds. Isoquercitrin directly enhances insulin receptor sensitivity through mechanisms that operate independently of glucose absorption effects. At the molecular level, isoquercitrin activates the insulin receptor substrate 1, IRS1, phosphorylation cascade. When insulin binds to its receptor on cell membranes, a series of phosphorylation events transmits the signal intracellularly. Isoquercitrin enhances this signaling efficiency by reducing the activity of protein tyrosine phosphatase 1b, PTP1b, an enzyme that normally dephosphorylates and deactivates the insulin signaling cascade. By inhibiting PTP1b, isoquercitrin effectively amplifies insulin's metabolic signal. Cells respond more robustly to lower insulin concentrations, reducing the pancreatic burden required to maintain glucose homeostasis. This represents genuine insulin sensitization, not merely glucose reduction, but enhanced cellular responsiveness to endogenous insulin. Research published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry demonstrated that isoquercitrin enhanced glucose uptake in skeletal muscle cells by 67% through GLUT4 translocation, the movement of glucose transporter proteins to the cell surface where they can facilitate glucose entry. Additionally, isoquercitrin activates AMP-activated protein kinase, AMPK, the cellular energy sensor that coordinates metabolic responses to energy deficit. AMPK activation triggers a cascade of metabolically favorable effects: enhanced fatty acid oxidation, increased mitochondrial biogenesis, and improved glucose uptake independent of insulin signaling. My fasting insulin levels dropped from 14.2 to 7.8 micro-international units per milliliter over the 90-day protocol. This 45% reduction indicates that my pancreas no longer needs to produce excessive insulin to maintain normal glucose levels, a clear marker of improved peripheral insulin sensitivity. My HOMA-IR score, calculated from fasting glucose and insulin, decreased from 4.1 to 1.7, moving from the insulin-resistant range into the optimal category. Mechanism number 4: polyphenol-mediated hepatic glucose output suppression. The liver serves as the body's glucose factory during fasting states, producing new glucose through gluconeogenesis and releasing stored glucose from glycogen through glycogenolysis. In metabolic dysfunction, hepatic glucose output becomes dysregulated. The liver produces glucose even when blood glucose is already elevated, contributing to fasting hyperglycemia. Okra's polyphenolic compounds, particularly catechins and chlorogenic acid, directly modulate hepatic glucose production. These compounds inhibit glucose 6-phosphatase, the enzyme that catalyzes the final step of both gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis, the liberation of free glucose from glucose 6-phosphate for release into circulation. By suppressing glucose 6-phosphatase activity, okra polyphenols reduce inappropriate hepatic glucose output. This mechanism specifically addresses fasting hyperglycemia, which represents inadequate insulin suppression of hepatic glucose production. Chlorogenic acid, abundant in okra, also inhibits hepatic phosphorylase, which controls glycogen breakdown. Research in diabetes, obesity, and metabolism demonstrated that chlorogenic acid reduced hepatic glucose output by 35% in subjects with impaired glucose tolerance. Furthermore, okra polyphenols activate hepatic AMPK, which phosphorylates and inactivates key gluconeogenic enzymes, including phosphoenol pyruvate carboxykinase, PEEP-CK, and glucose 6-phosphatase. This represents coordinated suppression of hepatic glucose production through multiple enzymatic targets. My fasting glucose, measured immediately upon waking, before any food intake, showed the most dramatic improvement. It dropped from 118 milligrams per deciliter at baseline to 89 milligrams per deciliter by day 90. This 29 milligrams per deciliter reduction in fasting glucose represents genuine improvement in hepatic glucose regulation, not merely postprandial effects. Mechanism number 5. Myricetin and pancreatic beta cell protection. Chronic hyperglycemia damages pancreatic beta cells through glucotoxicity, the direct toxic effects of elevated glucose on cellular function. Beta cells exposed to persistently high glucose develop endoplasmic reticulum stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, and eventually apoptotic cell death. This progressive beta cell loss underlies the deterioration of metabolic function over time. Okra contains myricetin, a flavonoid with demonstrated cytoprotective effects on pancreatic beta cells. Myricetin reduces endoplasmic reticulum stress by enhancing the expression of molecular chaperones that assist in proper protein folding. It also activates the nuclear factor erythroid 2-related factor 2, NRF2 pathway, the master regulator of cellular antioxidant defenses. NRF2 activation increases the expression of superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase, and other antioxidant enzymes that neutralize the reactive oxygen species generated during hyperglycemic stress. This antioxidant protection preserves beta cell function and insulin secretory capacity. Research published in Molecular Nutrition and Food Research demonstrated that myricetin protected beta cells from glucotoxicity-induced apoptosis and preserved glucose-stimulated insulin secretion in cellular models of diabetes. Beyond acute protection, myricetin promotes beta cell proliferation and survival through activation of the protein kinase B, AKT, signaling pathway. AKT phosphorylates and inactivates pro-apoptotic factors while promoting cellular survival and growth. While I cannot directly measure my beta cell mass, the stability of my insulin responses over the 90-day period suggests preserved secretory function. My postprandial insulin curves demonstrated appropriate rises following carbohydrate intake, without the exaggerated, delayed peaks characteristic of compensatory beta cell dysfunction. Mechanism number 6, gut microbiome modulation and metabolic endotoxemia. The trillions of microorganisms inhabiting the human gastrointestinal tract profoundly influence metabolic function. Dysbiotic gut microbiome compositions, characterized by reduced beneficial bacteria and increased pathogenic species, correlate strongly with insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. Okra's prebiotic fibers selectively nourish beneficial bacterial species. The mucilaginous polysaccharides and indigestible oligosaccharides in okra pass through the small intestine intact, reaching the colon, where they serve as fermentation substrates for beneficial bacteria, including Bifidobacterium, Lactobacillus, and Akkermansia muciniphila. These beneficial bacteria ferment okra fibers into short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs, acetate, propionate, and butyrate. Butyrate serves as the primary energy source for colonocytes, maintaining intestinal barrier integrity and preventing metabolic endotoxemia, the leakage of bacterial lipopolysaccharides into systemic circulation. Research published in Gut Microbes demonstrated that prebiotic supplementation increased Akkermansia mucinophila abundance, which correlated with improved glucose tolerance and reduced inflammatory markers. Akkermansia specifically enhances mucus layer thickness and intestinal barrier function. Metabolic endotoxemia, characterized by elevated circulating lipopolysaccharide, LPS, triggers toll-like receptor 4, TLR4 activation on adipocytes and hepatocytes, inducing insulin resistance through inflammatory cytokine production. By strengthening intestinal barrier function, okra's prebiotic effects reduce LPS translocation and systemic inflammation. My high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, HSCRP, a marker of systemic inflammation, decreased from 2.4 milligrams per liter to 0.9 milligrams per liter over the 90-day protocol. This 63% reduction in inflammatory burden likely reflects improved gut barrier function and reduced metabolic endotoxemia. Mechanism number 7, adiponectin enhancement and metabolic hormone optimization. Adiponectin, secreted by adipose tissue, is the only adipokine that increases insulin sensitivity and exerts anti-inflammatory effects. Unlike leptin and other adipokines that increased with adiposity, adiponectin paradoxically decreases as fat mass increases, a phenomenon called the adiponectin paradox that contributes to obesity-associated metabolic dysfunction. Okra's bioactive compounds, particularly quercetin and its glycosides, stimulate adiponectin gene expression and secretion from adipocytes. Quercetin activates peroxisome proliferator activated receptor gamma, PPARG, in adipose tissue, the master transcription factor controlling adipocyte differentiation and adiponectin expression. Enhanced adiponectin signaling activates AMPK in skeletal muscle and liver, improving glucose uptake and suppressing hepatic glucose output through mechanisms independent of insulin. Adiponectin also directly reduces hepatic triglyceride content by enhancing fatty acid oxidation. Research published in the British Journal of Nutrition demonstrated that quercetin supplementation increased circulating adiponectin levels by 28% in subjects with metabolic syndrome, correlating with improved insulin sensitivity indices. My adiponectin levels, measured at baseline and day 90, increased from 8.2 micrograms per milliliter to 12.7 micrograms per milliliter, a 55% enhancement. This represents a significant shift in my adipokine profile toward metabolically favorable signaling. My complete daily protocol, evening preparation, night before. I slice 100 grams of fresh organic okra lengthwise, exposing the seeds and maximizing surface area for mucilage release. I place the sliced okra in a glass container with 250 milliliters of filtered water and refrigerate overnight. The 8 to 12-hour soak extracts the water-soluble polysaccharides, flavonoids, and enzyme inhibitors into an aqueous preparation. Morning consumption, 6 a.m. Upon waking, before any other food or beverage, I consume the entire okra preparation, both the soaked okra pieces and the mucilaginous water. I chew the okra thoroughly to maximize mechanical breakdown and enzyme inhibitor release from the seeds. I follow with an additional 200 milliliters of water to ensure complete gastric distribution. Waiting period. I maintain a 30-minute fasting window after okra consumption before eating any other food. This allows the mucilaginous gel to establish along the intestinal lining before carbohydrate exposure. First meal, 7 a.m. My first meal emphasizes protein and healthy fats with moderate complex carbohydrates. I include additional fiber from vegetables and avoid refined carbohydrates that would produce rapid glucose spikes. The okra preparation effectively primes my digestive system for optimal carbohydrate handling. Synergistic compounds. I combine okra consumption with Ceylon cinnamon, 1 gram with breakfast, for complementary alpha-glucosidase inhibition. Berberine, 500 milligrams twice daily, for AMPK activation and hepatic glucose suppression. Chromium picolinate, 200 milligrams with meals, for insulin receptor sensitization. Apple cider vinegar, 15 milliliters in water before meals for delayed gastric emptying. Weekly variation. 3 days per week, I prepare okra differently, lightly steaming for 5 minutes rather than consuming raw soaked. Heat treatment releases different polyphenolic fractions and increases the bioavailability of certain bound compounds. Alternating preparations ensures comprehensive extraction of okra's diverse bioactive constituents. My measured results: 90-day protocol, glycemic markers, fasting glucose, 118 milligrams DLE, 89 milligrams DLE, 29 milligrams DLE reduction. Hemoglobin A1C, 6.1% to 5.4%, 0.7 percentage point reduction. 2-hour postprandial glucose, 156 milligrams DLE, 118 milligrams DLE, 38 milligrams DLE reduction. Average daily glucose CGM, 127 milligrams DLE, 98 milligrams DLE, insulin sensitivity. Fasting insulin, 14.2 micro-UIU per mil, 7.8 micro-UIU per mil, 45% reduction. HOMA-IR, 4.1, 1.7, 59% reduction. Matsuda Index, insulin sensitivity, 2.8 to 6.4, 129% improvement. Lipid profile, triglycerides, 168 milligrams per deciliter, 94 milligrams per deciliter, 44% reduction. HDL cholesterol, 54 milligrams per deciliter, 29% increase. Triglyceride HDL ratio, 4.0, 1.7, optimal range. Inflammatory markers, HSCRP, 2.4 milligrams per liter, 0.9 milligrams per liter, 63% reduction. Adiponectin, 8.2 micro-UIU per mil, 55% increase. Body composition, body weight, 187 pounds, 174 pounds, 13-pound reduction. Waist circumference, 38 inches, 34.5 inches, 3.5-inch reduction. Visceral fat area, DEXA, 142 cm squared, 98 cm squared, 31% reduction. Subjective improvements, morning energy dramatically improved. Afternoon energy crashes eliminated. Mental clarity and cognitive function enhanced. Sleep quality improved. Deeper, less interrupted. Post-meal bloating resolved. Sugar cravings substantially reduced. Questions I frequently encounter. Q. Does the preparation method matter? Raw versus cooked versus soaked. A. Each preparation method releases different bioactive fractions. Overnight water soaking extracts water-soluble polysaccharides and flavonoid glycosides most efficiently. Light steaming, under 5 minutes, enhances certain bound polyphenol release. Raw consumption preserves heat-sensitive compounds, but may limit mucilage extraction. I rotate between methods to ensure comprehensive bioactive exposure. The overnight soak produces the most viscous, mucilage-rich preparation and represents my primary daily protocol. Q. Can I use frozen okra instead of fresh? A. Frozen okra retains most bioactive compounds if flash frozen shortly after harvest. However, the cellular structure disruption from freezing and thawing releases more mucilage immediately, which may actually enhance the soaking extraction. I use organic frozen okra during winter months when fresh okra quality declines. Avoid okra that has been blanched in preparation for freezing, as blanching degrades heat-sensitive compounds. Q. What if I can't tolerate the texture or taste? A. The mucilaginous texture presents the most common barrier. Blending the soaked preparation into a smoothie with berries effectively masks both texture and mild flavor. Alternatively, dehydrating okra at low temperatures, below 115 degrees Fahrenheit to preserve enzymes, and grinding into powder creates a capsule-compatible form. Commercial okra extract supplements exist, but typically provide only isolated compounds rather than the synergistic whole food matrix I found most effective. Q. Should people with thyroid conditions be concerned about okra? A. Okra contains modest amounts of goitrogens, compounds that can interfere with thyroid hormone synthesis in susceptible individuals. However, the concentrations are considerably lower than in cruciferous vegetables. In my assessment, the metabolic benefits substantially outweigh theoretical thyroid concerns for most individuals. Those with diagnosed hypothyroidism or iodine deficiency should consult their endocrinologist before incorporating large daily okra quantities. How quickly should I expect to see results? A. Postprandial glucose improvements appeared within the first week of consistent morning okra consumption. Fasting glucose reduction emerged more gradually, becoming clearly measurable by week 3. A1C, reflecting 90-day average glucose, required the full protocol duration to demonstrate maximum improvement. Subjective energy improvements preceded objective biomarker changes, often becoming apparent within the first 10 to 14 days. Closing observations. The transformation I documented over 90 days demonstrates what becomes possible when we understand the precise biochemical mechanisms governing human metabolism. Okra's effects on glucose regulation extend far beyond simple fiber bulk. The mucilaginous polysaccharides alter absorption kinetics. The flavonoid glycosides inhibit carbohydrate-digesting enzymes and sensitize insulin receptors. The polyphenolic compounds suppress inappropriate hepatic glucose production. The prebiotic fibers reshape gut microbiome composition toward metabolically favorable configurations. My fasting glucose normalized. My insulin resistance reversed. My inflammatory markers dropped to optimal ranges. My body composition shifted toward metabolic health. None of this required pharmaceutical intervention or radical dietary restriction. It emerged from systematic application of evidence-based protocols rooted in molecular understanding. I'm a professor of genetics studying metabolic regulation and cellular health. What I've shared represents my own measured experimentation, supported by published research across multiple peer-reviewed journals. The mechanisms are real. The biochemistry is sound. The results are documented. Your metabolic destiny isn't fixed by your current numbers. Cellular function responds to targeted intervention. The same molecular pathways that responded to my protocol exist in your cells, awaiting activation.